It is no secret that Fortnite has had a strange and crazy advancement in its movement over the past 8 years. From slow-paced moderate gameplay in 2017 to now over 10 different changes, all the way from visual aspects to core gameplay mechanics. It's safe to say that some of these changes were loved by many and some hated by most. A video game's movement can be a complete make or break on whether you really play the game or not, because it's one of the key fundamentals of any game. Today, we'll take a look back at every single movement aspect in Fortnite Battle Royale, as well as some mechanics that were completely forgotten. To answer the true question, did Fortnite overload its movement? Or is it what the game needed to ultimately survive and stay up to par with other competing genres? Back in Season 0, Fortnite's movement was actually completely different than what you might think. So many people who played during that era forgot about this one mechanic, and that was solely due to the movement being completely different on PC and console. You could crouch, walk, and sprint. And you might be asking, Tricky, isn't the sprint just the regular running animation? Well, as we look at it today, yes, but in Season 0, if you were on keyboard and mouse, you actually had to hold down the W key along with the shift button to sprint. And if you only held W, you would just run around like this. Again, this only affected the keyboard and mouse players, and later on, they changed it to where you only had to press shift once at the start of the match after you landed to activate the sprint. It's funny looking back because if you watched Fearless or C-Day and saw anytime they encountered a default/new player, the reason they knew they were a default is because the player would just be doing the noob walk. Thankfully, in patch v5.10, sprint by default was added for all players and set as on by default for all players in patch v12.10. Crouching was also much different too. There were actually two different crouch speeds, one being the regular super slow crouch speed that was horrid to use, and then the crouch sprinting. Crouch sprinting was automatically set as the default in Chapter 5, which made it much easier to traverse quietly and sneak around buildings. In Season 1, Fortnite added jump pads and directional jump pads to the game, which made traversing faster, and also you did not take any fall damage, meaning you could build up to the height limit and stay there until the end of the game, until there was one player remaining. Jump on their head and one pump them and you win the game. The only problem was just making sure you didn't get shot out. Jump pads were eventually replaced by launch pads and bouncers, which ultimately suited the game so much more and made movement even more technical for the Chapter 1 competitive era. We also saw the introduction of grapplers, which made traversing the maps so much easier. Let's move on to Chapter 2. In the beginning, once the competitive scene started to rise after the Fortnite World Cup took place, with over $40 million up for grabs, players tried seeking bigger advantages to allow them a competitive edge. One player by the name of Martaz popularized the new movement strategy for players on keyboard and mouse. This ultimately landed him a deal in FaZe Clan and made him one of the most popular movement and mechanic YouTube channels during Chapter 2. See, movement on controller and keyboard were completely different. Controller players were given more of an advantage with their movement since they weren't using their entire arm to build, move, or aim. They were only using a little joystick for both running, looking around, basically everything. Epic Games decided that it would be much better if they were given 360 movement, and this made a lot of sense. The joystick moves in a 360 pattern. This allowed them to place builds and jump corners that keyboard players could not. However, Martaz showed the community that there was a different way to traverse on keyboard and mouse using a thumb joystick under your keyboard. This meant you could use 360 movement on a keyboard without sacrificing playing on a controller while still having your mouse to aim. And let me tell you, it was completely broken for a while. The reason this worked is that Fortnite allows dual input for both controller and keyboard. This is unlike Call of Duty, where you have to lock your input for each match you play. But in Fortnite, you can use both at the same time or swap throughout the match if you wanted to. But this was only the start of 360 movement. There were other wacky and wild ways of getting it for free, like taping two of your keys together, like A to the caps lock key or D to the F key, to activate what we call today as double movement. But one of the most popular ways of doing this was just buying a keyboard that allowed you to press one key and activate two keys at the same time. This is called a macro. Obviously, this sparked up a huge debate in the community, some saying that it's bannable and some saying it's not. However, Epic Games released a statement saying remappers are allowed within Fortnite. However, binding and remapping to multiple binds would not be permitted. meaning you could still use double movement, but pressing that same bind to activate another bind is not permitted. Yeah, it's really confusing, and honestly, it still confuses me to this day, but hey, at least Epic Games decided to later add double movement as a setting, but it took 2 years long. In this chapter, we also received swimming, since before if you touched water, you were either immediately dead, or if you were in the middle of Loot Lake on chapter 1, you took a gamble on crossing, because it was nearly impossible to build in the lake. I won't cover swimming much, however, the biggest fundamentals of its movement were diving up and down, swimming on the surface, or just floating. But it was a great quality of life change. I think the main reason they added this mechanic was they wanted their storyline to intertwine with a flood season, and without swimming, Chapter 2 Season 3 would not have been possible. Well, it would have, but that would have been the worst map in Fortnite's history. In Chapter 2 Season 5, which personally is my top 5 seasons of all time, sand tunneling was added. All you had to do was stand still for a few seconds and you would sink below the sand, making it so much easier to traverse, and way harder for players to shoot you. But this was the biggest problem. Sand tunneling, it was just way too buggy. Players found out ways to shoot out of sand tunnels, stay in sand the entire match, and also go under the map. Epic Games ultimately ended up vaulting sand tunnels indefinitely, and they have not returned since Chapter 2 Season 5. Comment down below if you would like to see sand tunneling back, because I thought it was one of the coolest movement mechanics and also very different. Along with sand tunneling, Fortnite added 0-point crystals. This intertwined with the storyline, but they allowed you to dash and move at higher speeds, ultimately being able to dodge players' bullets at times. We have seen reintroductions of similar mechanics in Fortnite Chapter 5 and also with the Simpsons season with the Blinky Fish, which is the leading factor of why I had to add it to this list. Now moving on to Chapter 3, which had the biggest movement advancements of all time, which is sliding. Don't worry, I didn't forget about tack sprinting, but sliding was actually added first prior to tack sprinting. Players can now slide down mountains, build ramps, so it was easier to rotate if the zone pulled backwards. And also, there was just so much more that you could do with it. But the only problem with sliding was that it used the same bind as your crouch, meaning if you meant to crouch walk towards an enemy, you could accidentally slide towards them, revealing your position. Thankfully, in the next season, sliding was way more useful due to the addition of tack sprinting. Now, tactical sprinting, which was a very controversial topic and addition, and also it's still one of the most controversial additions of movement to this day. You can now build faster, rotate faster, and the overall gameplay of Battle Royale feels completely different than 3 years ago. The good thing is that tack sprinting had a limit of how much you could sprint, meaning you had to be conservative with it and it wouldn't last forever. Now looking back, gameplay did feel a lot slower, but we were just so accustomed to the sprinting speed back then, so we probably just didn't think anything of it. But using tack sprinting with sliding now makes different movement options available to use. You can now sprint, jump, and slide down hills. Sprint, slide up ramps to get up faster, and also throw off the enemy's shots. And overall for competitive, it just made it so much more interesting and complex to watch. But the biggest thing with intertwining both tack sprint and sliding is the shooting aspect. If sliding was not in the game with tack sprint, it would make it so much harder to shoot an enemy after sprinting. But with sliding, it allows a flow of gameplay that otherwise would not be possible. The best example of this is tarping into another zone quickly. Sliding does not take up any tack sprint stamina, so you can tack sprint towards where you want to go, slide and tarp in safely, while saving stamina. In Chapter 3 Season 2, Epic Games released Zero Build into Fortnite. Personally, Zero Build is just pretty odd and honestly ironic to me to this day, since the whole purpose of Fortnite is to build. If you main Zero Build, comment down below why you do. Don't make the answer because there are too many sweats in Fortnite builds. But with Zero Build, obviously players had to find ways to get up mountains and traverse buildings more easily. This is when Epic Games introduced the mantle mechanic. You can now mantle up the height of one wall to traverse more quickly and easily. Now, the mantle mechanic in Zero Build is fine, but in main builds, it's pretty controversial, even to this day. Everything has its positives and negatives, but if you mantle and there's an enemy waiting for you, you're basically dead instantly, because there's a delay from the time you mantle till the time you can pull your gun back out. So many people would say, well, just don't mantle. But the problem was that if you tried to jump behind your roof and shoot a player, you could do it by accident, and the enemy can land an easy but detrimental shot. This will be a reoccurring theme for most of the movement additions that were added into the game. Chapter 3 also brought many more notable mechanics that we know today, like door bashing and slide kicking. Door bashing could allow you to bust open doors much faster without sacrificing time. and also make it easier to enter a building if there is an enemy inside. Before, you would just have to slowly open a door, which made it easier for an enemy to shoot you because there was also a delay pulling out your gun. But now you have the option to do this. Slide kicking allows you to kick players off structures, break builds, and entry fights more easily. This is most definitely to this day one of the best mechanics for winning fights, because there are multiple ways to kill an enemy with slide kicking. This could be rushing their build while it's low HP and entering their builds, kicking players off the map after you rift or launch pad into the tower, also landing, and so many different options. Another addition within this season is hurdling. Now, hurdling can be the best and worst thing at times. The biggest problem with hurdling is trying to get through windows. Let's say I run up to a window and jump through. If I'm on a ramp or any uneven platform, it makes it nearly impossible to get through windows if it's a tiny space. I've died multiple times in the Simpsons season this way after repeatedly spamming spacebar trying to get out of a window when I was getting chased with no gun. Needless to say, I was cussing at the top of my lungs and I was very angry. But the reason why this is a problem is that hurdle is the same bind as jump. So it will give you the cue to hurdle through the window. However, it just won't let you because the game recognizes the main bind as a jump. Overall, hurdling needs some minor fixes, but these minor fixes lead to major gameplay flaws and competitive. And I'm telling you, some of these mechanics can cost players tens of thousands, maybe even upwards of millions of dollars in tournaments if they misplay hurdling. Now on to Chapter 5, which was one of the biggest movement changes of all time. This was the leading factor of one of the highest earning pros winning over $1 million in competitive Fortnite, leaving the game due to some of these changes. The regular running speed, crouch speed, and strafe speed were lowered at the start, like by a lot. There were a ton of side-by-side tests showing that the old movement speed was in fact faster than the new movement speed. It felt so wonky, and players expressed how much they hated the new movement by sending threats to the creator of the new movement. Yeah, it was pretty insane how bad people hated the new movement. After a few days of outrage, Epic Games decided it was time to revert the movement speed back to its original. However, they kept the newer animations, so their hard work didn't feel like a waste. We also received wall climbing, which instead of hurdling up a one wall tall build, you can now wall climb up to the sky limit. It wasn't too broken. I mean, climbing up to the sky limit is pretty crazy, but if you have to build all the way up there first, which is what you had to do, it's not really that big of a deal. I think the main reason this was added was for zero build players to traverse around the map quickly. The attention to detail with wall climbing was pretty cool, because Epic added a little wooden plank to each of the walls to climb on. It's pretty minor, but with this season, Epic Games really tried to show off their UEFN client by really spoiling their players with attention to detail and realism. However, not too long later, Fortnite ditched the planks on the walls and changed to something even more wild. You could technically still wall climb, but now you could quickly scramble up buildings, meaning instead of mantling once over one wall, you can now basically get up 2 walls. This made it much easier to try to get out of fights if it wasn't in-game and uphill. I don't have much more to say about this, but overall, I think it was a great addition to the game for both builds and zero builds. Wall kicking was added early in Chapter 6, which is just like boosting off a wall, but it can launch you super, and I mean super duper far if you are not careful. Roll landing was also added to the game, paired with wall kicking. This helped negate fall damage when landing and also made different ways to traverse the way you wanted to fight. But there is a big problem with the movement today. It's not just the animations or small changes that affect how the gameplay is today. It's just the copious amount of movement for just one bind. All in all, for the spacebar, you can have 8 different outcomes if you press the button: jumping, hurdling, mantling, wall climbing, wall kicking, wall scrambling, ledge jumping, and roll landing. This makes it really hard, especially in intense situations, to truly press what you want the button to do. Epic Games has sort of figured out better alternatives, however, there still needs to be more work done. Over the 8 years that Fortnite has been released, it's safe to say that in my opinion, Chapter 4 movement and animations was one of the best movement styles that we have seen. Epic Games should really try and advance on movement much more slowly, and go back to only adding one mechanic every chapter and reworking the movement each and every chapter, because right now it is just absurd and way too much to handle for players. Anyways guys, if you made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like these, and comment down below what movement style was truly your favorite, and also what movement styles would you like paired from the older chapters and the newer chapters to create a utopic movement style for all players. Anyways guys, it's been your boy Tricky, and I'm out. Peace.